Hi everyone, I'm Dave Wood and this is Semiosis 101. So welcome to the special omnibus edition on general Peircean semiotic theory for illustrators and designers. If I need to introduce myself again, I'm Dave Wood and I am Scouse Scott, a design educator and researcher and a published design author. I've worked commercially as both a freelance illustrator and graphic designer, and this Scouse Scott Semiosis 101 YouTube channel focuses on explaining the semiotic theory of Charles Sanders Peirce in a more designer-centric way to visual communication designers, illustrators, graphic designers. On this Scouse Scott Semiosis 101 YouTube channel, I post weekly at least one 10-minute explainer video on an aspect of Peirce's pragmatic semiotic theory. And the aim of these free videos is to take Peirce's quite complex philosophical theoretical language and using designer-centric terms put it in the context of designing visual communication, whether these are illustrations, motion, branding, packaging, editorial, etc. In this first omnibus episode, we have the first of 4 videos back to back focused on what is semiosis, Charles Sanders Peirce's pragmatic design action. In video 1, we discuss the elephant in design studio. Then in video 2, we'll move on to semiosis for designers and illustrators. And then in video 3, we will discuss the semiotic journey before wrapping up the omnibus with an episode on the semiosis box of tricks. Now, if you prefer to watch the videos individually, you can on this Scouse Scott Semiosis 101 channel, or stay tuned and watch them all in order in this omnibus. Okay, ready to begin? In that case, we'll start with the elephant in the design studio, in which I define the 2 forms of semiotic theory. So Sear's semiology and Peirce's semiosis. So over the next 10 minutes, I will give you the key contextual knowledge of semiotic theory, but in designer-centric terms, which will help you to improve your visual communication skills. So stay tuned, subscribe, let's go. Right, so the elephant in the design studio that we're gonna focus on during this 10-minute talk is about the designer's knowledge and what the designer creates. So the visual communication designer, whether or not you are a graphic designer, illustrator, motion designer, whatever, this is where we're talking from. So Polanyi, in his book, The Tacit Dimension, talks about tacit knowledge. And that's how graphic designers and illustrators sort of describe how their knowledge comes about. They just do what they do because that's their training. They feel instinctively that's what they're doing. But there's a lot of theory that underpins that, whether or not they realise that or not. So this is what Polanyi talks about indirectly in his book on tacit knowledge. He talks about tacit knowledge as a way of suggesting that the work created by the designer comes from a knowledge we cannot tell, because we can't put that into words of how it works. We just know it works. We have what he calls wissen and können. We know what is to be done, which leads to knowing how to do it. So they're the 2 things that underpin how designers, visual communication designers, discuss their work through tacit knowledge. So that tacit knowledge is really underpinned by a lot of theoretical knowledge. So the knowing what is to be done, wissen, which then leads to knowing how to do it, können. So within what Polanyi is talking about here from a visual communication designer, illustrator's point of view, is the fact that the theoretical knowledge is the knowing how to do things. And that's what the focus really about these videos are all going to be about in regards to semiotics, or Peircean semiotic theory, which I'll come on to. So the elephant in the design studio really, in regards to theory, is the fact that in design school, we do get given theory when we teach it and when we learn. We do get that. We learn through doing. We learn how to know how to do something. But in the real world of designer land, out in the real commercial world, and theory land, which is seen to be more academic, there seems to be a split between these two areas, because in design we haven't got the theoretical legacy of hundreds and hundreds of years worth of theory underpinning design, even though we do, but we borrow design theory from other theories. So I'm just going to come on to an important one here, which is semiotics, and that's what the focus of all the videos are going to be about. Okay, semiotics, the theory of signs. So in his book, Hall, this means this means that, A User's Guide to Semiotics, Hall defines the semiotic journey, which is very helpful to understand how visual communicators can employ the use of signs to enhance their visual communication of whatever it is that they've been asked to do. So the semiotic journey, as far as Hall is concerned, starts with the sender. So to begin the actual process, there's a sender. With that sender, there's an intention of communication. There's got to be a message that needs to be communicated, visually communicated. That then needs to be transmitted in some media. How effective that transmission is going to be, it gets affected by external noise, all kinds of other things get in the way of effective communication. And that noise affects how the receiver of the visual communication of the semiotic journey is actually going to understand what's being communicated to them. That receiver is the destination, and that destination is essentially where everything comes together and people know what they are receiving. So let's just unpack this a little bit further. So we have your client. In our case, as visual communication designers, illustrators, we start off with a brief from the client. So the client is the sender, that's who we're working for. The brief is the intention. What is the requirement of the actual project that we are creating an illustration for, or a piece of graphic design for, a campaign for, whatever it is? What needs to be communicated, which is the message. How do we communicate that? Well, the graphic design, illustration, whatever we were commissioned to do, the deliverables of that. The noise, what gets in the way of this. And in a way, all of these videos are going to be focusing on how to effectively get beyond the visual communication noise of competing attention spans directly to the receiver, who is the audience that we have, that our graphic design and illustrations need to communicate to. And the destination is effective visual communication. So Hall talks about the sender, the intention, the message, the transmission, the noise gets in the way, the receiver, and the destination as part of the semiotic journey. And in the white here, you can see on the screen, this is breaking it down into how that actually applies into the day-to-day world of visual communication designers, illustrators. Your client, the brief the client gives you, what needs to be communicated, how are you going to do that, what's the transmission form going to be, what's going to get in the way of that communication, how do you get over that noise to your audience and effectively visually communicate the intended message that is needed within there. So they're all the things that semiotics can really help designers and illustrators to really go beyond just tacit knowledge, to have a bit more understanding exactly how they could be more effective. So semiotics, the next question really is, which semiotics do you want to follow? So semiotics, there's two main semiotic theories. Both of them were developed in the early 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century. One was in Europe and one was in North America. So let's just quickly unpack these two semiotic theories. We have Charles Sanders Peirce in North America. He came up with semiotic theory. And then we've got de Saussure in Europe. And these two people came to semiotic theory by two different paths. So let's just quickly unpack a little bit more of that. So Peirce, for the sake of how Peircean semiotic theory is applied to visual communication design, I'm using the term semiosis to describe Peirce's semiotic theory. And semiology is the semiotic theory for Saussure. So we have these two different semiotic theories that not necessarily are competing, but both of them have different ways of approaching how semiotics effectively works. We have Ferdinand de Saussure, who's a structuralist. His theory is semiology. His theory is more linguistic. And then we have Charles Sanders Peirce, who's one of the founders of the pragmatist philosophical movement, and his semiotic theory for, as far as graphic designers and illustrators are concerned, is semiosis. Semiosis is a word he defined himself, which basically means sign action, the action of the sign. And in future videos, we will unpack these, but right now, this is the two particular theories of semiotics. Both of them follow the same semiotic journey, roughly. And what I will do in the future videos is unpack how the theory of semiosis from Charles Sanders Peirce can be not just employed by visual communication designers, graphic designers and illustrators, but also how you can apply the theory, which is really quite complex, but apply the theory into the fundamentals of the ideation to actually help enhance your visual communication. So come back and watch more of the videos as they appear on this YouTube channel. And that's it for today.
So now you can see that theory is crucial to improving creativity, and that the semiotic journey is already embedded in our design process. I have defined the two main semiotic theories of Saussure and Peirce in order to focus on Peirce's semiosis in future videos. In this second video coming up, Semiosis for Designers and Illustrators, I dig a little deeper into the key features of the semiotic theories, setting out the dyadic and the triadic differences between semiology and semiosis. We will see how Peirce's triadic relationship between the concept, how it's represented and then interpreted, offers visual communicators, illustrators and designers a powerful theoretical scaffolding around which you can enhance your visual communication effectiveness. It will be another theory-packed 10 minutes of Peirce's semiosis, but in designer-centric terms. So stay tuned, subscribe, hit the bell, and let's go on to video 2.
In the previous video, I talked about the two different forms of semiotic theory. So what we have is essentially two pieces of semiotic theory, one developed in Europe and one developed in North America at the early stage of the 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century. In Europe, the philosophy of semiotics is classed as a structuralist philosophy. It comes from, it's called semiology, and Saussure developed it, which was then taken further by other philosophers into, an expanded theory. In America, in North America, in the same period of time, we have Charles Sanders Peirce developing the philosophy of pragmatism, and also as part of that development of pragmatism, he is responsible for his semiotic theory, which from a graphic design, illustration, visual communication design point of view, I'm calling semiosis. It's a word he defined himself, which is essentially meaning sign action, the action of the sign. So all the videos are going to be focusing more on Charles Sanders Peirce, but this first video here is going to look at the just slight differences between the two. I'm not going to go into great depth about semiology because I'm going to lead towards semiosis instead. So just as an overview of the fundamental aspects of semiology, obviously it's a lot more complicated than what I'm going to be covering in this talk. But for a sign to function from a semiology point of view, and for that sign to communicate to us, it has two functional parts. And this is the thing, if you say semiotics to people, I think this is the one that most people will say if they know anything about semiotics: the signifier and the signified. So these two terms are from Saussure, are from semiology. It's talking about the signifier and the signified. So what does that actually mean? Well, here's an example. A signifier could be the colour red. The colour red as a semiotic sign could mean any of these things. It could be meaning fire, it could be meaning passion, it could be meaning anger, danger, strength. That would be what would be classed as the signified from the signifier. So red is the signifier, it signifying something, and the signified is the meaning we take from what's being signified. So it could be fire, passion, anger, danger, strength, depending on what context we see the colour red in as a semiotic sign. So that's coming through Saussure. So just to summarise the fundamental starting points of semiology. The signifier is the form of the sign. It could be a word, image, sound, etc. But we're talking about visual communication here. So, we're talking about things that we can see visually, whether or not that's words or images. The signified is the concept that is being represented by the signifier. So the signifier and the signified comes together as part of the semiotic sign that semiology discusses in more depth, in more theory. So if you're interested in this particular area of semiotics, there's loads of books out there if you want to follow a structuralist linguistic approach to semiotics. But I'm just going to flip to now, essentially, semiosis. Charles Sanders Peirce, philosopher, he basically created or was one of the founding fathers of pragmatism, a new philosophy coming out in North America. He says in his writings, nothing is a sign unless it is interpreted as a sign. And that's really crucial to what we're going to explore over all of these videos that I'm going to be putting on this channel. Nothing is a sign unless it is interpreted as a sign. It's that word interpreted that is going to be the linchpin to everything that we talk about. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, one of the problems, and I'll say this up front because this is what I'm going to be unpacking come all the videos, is that Peirce, being a philosopher, came up with lots of different terms he invented that in a way obfuscates his intention of what the theory can actually help with. And one of these words here is in the first line, a sign or representamen. So there's one word already, representamen, is something which stands to somebody for something in some respective capacity. It addresses somebody, that is, creates in the mind of that person an equivalent sign or perhaps a more developed sign. That sign, which it creates, I call, which is Peirce calls, the interpretant of the first sign. Two words already, representamen, interpretant. The sign stands for something, its object. Now these words are crucial to how Peirce describes his semiotic theory. Representamen, interpretant, and object. So I'll unpack those three words as we go through videos. And the whole intent behind these videos is I place Peircean semiotic theory in more designer-centric terms. But it's important to drop in here the actual language that Peirce uses in his theory, because that is the big blockage as far as trying to apply it to graphic design illustration, because we don't use these terms. We've never come across these terms if we're reading Peirce from scratch. So let's just go through that again and replacing his words with something that we understand. Okay, so here's my translation of what he's saying in the terms of visual communication. A sign, its representation, is something which stands to somebody for something in some respect or capacity. The representation addresses somebody. That is, it creates in the mind of that person an equivalent sign or representation, perhaps, of a more developed idea. That sign which it creates is essentially that person's interpretation of the representation. That representation stands for something, a concept. So by changing those words to object, the concept you start from, how that concept is represented, and then how that representation is then interpreted by your audience, is essentially the fundamentals of how to apply Peircean semiotic theory into visual communication design, graphic design, illustration. And that brings us to what we have that he describes is a determination flow. The concept that needs to be communicated, how you represent that concept, leads to its interpretation, and that interpretation should put in the mind of the audience the concept you need to communicate. And that sums up the visual communication journey, and within there we can look at ways of using Peircean semiotic theory to enhance our visual communication skills, to improve how effectively we communicate to our intended audiences, from the client through how we create the design outcomes, illustration outcomes that will then be taken by our target audiences and understood by them, that leads them back to the original concept. So some of those awkward words that Peirce uses in his theory, that becomes straight away problematic to anybody who is not Peirce, because we have to understand what does he mean by these complex terms. So Peirce uses a three approach to everything he does, a triadic approach. So everything is in threes. So we have the concept, the object, representament, which is representation, interpretance, which is basically the interpretation of it. There's the first major triad of terms. And within each of those, we have three different levels of complexity. And there's that word. I'm going to be making all these things accessible to designers and illustrators as we go through videos. Representament is split into three different levels. So the representation is got three different levels. Everything from what he calls a quali sign, a synth sign, up to a legi sign. I'm not going to unpack them yet. They will be in future videos. We'll unpack them in future videos. The interpretants, he classes in three different levels, from simple to complex: the rime, dissonant, and argument. Again, I'm not going to unpack them right now. I'm just putting these terms out here because these will be refined as designer-centric terms over coming videos. And the ones that we're going to be focusing on more so in the very early stages of the videos is about the concept, the representation of the concept. And even here, there are two terms that have now developed different meanings in visual communication design than when Peirce came up with these. So in Peirce, simple to complex, the representation of the concept, icon, index, and symbol. An icon and a symbol now has different meanings or other meanings within design. So I'm going to be unpacking those as we go through. So at this stage, I just wanted to show these different terms, which is just underpinning how complex Peirce's language is, which means that these videos are going to be really important to translate these into designer-centric terms so that designers can have Peircean theory more accessible to their day-to-day terms of use.
So that is our 10 minutes of semiosis for designers and illustrators. In this second video of the Omnibus, we have now a clearer understanding of the key differences between Saussure's semiology and Peirce's semiosis theories of semiotics. So SIRS semiology focuses on the signifier and the signified. Pearson semiosis involves the audience directly in the sign action. Designing for audiences is embedded in our design process from ideation to publication, and Pearson semiosis utilises the sign action power between what the concept is, how it is represented, which facilitates the interpretation. This interpretation leads the audience connotatively to the concept, thus completing what Peirce calls a determination flow. The crucial benefit of semiosis to creatives is this key factor of interpretation, which involves understanding our audiences to enhance our visual communication effectiveness. Okay, now we'll move on to video 3, the semiotic journey. So let's now see this third episode, which focuses again in more detail on Hall's semiotic journey in the concept of Peirce's semiosis and our audience. We will dig deeper into the semiotic journey to understand pragmatic sign action between concept, representations and interpretations. Now, to help you see the real world benefits of semiosis in enhancing your visual communication skills, I'll end on explaining how the theory's determination flow between the concept, its representation and the audience's interpretation works. It's another theory-packed 10 minutes of semiosis, but in design-centric terms. Ready? Enjoying the video so far? Then please give a like and also leave a comment. Alright, done all that? Okay, let's get to the third video now.
Okay, so we're exploring Peircean semiotic theory. So we'll just come back to Sean Hall, and in his book, This Means This, This Means That, he uses Guide to Semiotics. He talks about the semiotic journey. So let's just explore the semiotic journey once more. We did it in the first video, but we're going to explore it again once more because it's important to put this into a context now of semiosis, Peircean semiotic theory, pragmatic semiotic theory. Okay, so in Peirce's semiotic theory, it begins a journey of the sender. The sender of the semiotic communication begins the whole thing off. It continues with the intention of that sender. Why does that sender need to communicate semiotically? What's the intention behind that? In that intention, what is the message that needs to be semiotically communicated? How will that be transmitted? What will be in the way of that transmission that we need to overcome? The noise. Who does it go to? The receiver of the semiotic communication, because communication is a two-way thing. It needs to have a receiver as well as the sender. So communication, two-way thing at least. And ultimately the destination of where that semiotic journey ends. Okay, so we've got this, which is very useful in Hall's book, Sean Hall's book. The sender, the intention, the message, the transmission, the noise, the receiver, the destination. This is really a crucial overview on how, in our case, visual communication works. Okay, this is about communication in general, but these videos are about visual communication. So the sender, the intention, the message, transmission, noise, the receiver, the destination. Let's put this into the context of visual communication design, graphic design, illustration. Everything starts off in our world with our clients. They are the ones who commission us to do a particular visual communication job for them. They have a brief, they brief us on what they need that we can supply them through our skills that we've honed and learned through design school into professional life. The brief. In that brief, as visual communicators, we're looking to really find what needs to be communicated through the skills that we employ for that. which comes into how we, as visual communication designers, graphic designers, illustrators, what mediums are we going to use to communicate that message? That's our transmission. But it's not just about pushing ideas out there through visual communication and hoping everyone is going to basically lap it up and really enjoy everything that you put out there, because there's always going to be some noise getting in the way of that. What gets in the way of that? Well, when I talk to students about if they're doing a poster project, how many other posters have they seen that day that they've not taken any notice of? Because if they're designing a poster, it's going to be competing against that. If you're designing a book, it's going to be on a bookshelf next to other books competing for the attention span of the audience. So what visual noise and other noise is going to get in the way of your intended receiver understanding and making decisions on what you design? Well, understanding who your audiences are is crucial in design, full stop. And it's also crucial within Peircean semiotic theory, because it was really geared towards crafting, in our case, visual communication using semiotics that our audiences will connect with. And in future videos, we will really unpack all the aspects of all what that means. Because where the destination is the fact that once your audience is exposed to your design, your illustration, your creative output, you want that to actually, those outcomes of your design process, to answer the brief for the client and actually do what the client has asked you to do, rather than just be, ooh, that's good. So effective visual communication that connects back to the message through the transmission, that connects with the intention of what your client asked you to do in the first place. So it's a win-win situation all around. And my arguments throughout all of these videos are going to be that Peircean semiotic theory, despite the complexity of his language, of Peirce's language, gives you tools to be able to do that. And that's what we will unpack in these videos. So let's just quickly finish this video off by a reminder that there are two different semiotic theories. I will just outline what those two different semiotic theories are, because from now on, we're only going to be focusing in on Peircean semiotic theory. Okay, so we're already aware that there are two forms of semiotic theory. There's from the North American school of thought, which is Peirce, and from the European is Saussure. Peirce's semiotic theory I call semiosis. It's a word he defined, which basically means sign action, the action of the sign. Semiosis, as opposed to Saussure's semiology. Semiosis, semiology, both are semiotic theory. So let's just unpack what this means a little bit further. Well, Peirce is a pragmatist. He's one of the founding fathers of the pragmatic school of theory. And then we have in Europe Saussure, who's a structuralist. So I'm not going to go any further into what those two things mean. I will focus in a future video on pragmatism in general as a philosophy that helps designers action their skill sets to move forward. So I'll be talking about the theory in connection to the design practice. And this is one of the last times I'll probably have anything on Saussure. I've already mentioned in a previous video about Peirce's semiotic theory is based upon triads, sets of three. Whereas semiology, the signifier and the signified is a dyadic structure, two. So the signifier and the signified is the structureless one. Pragmatic is essentially a different way of approaching semiotic theory, and the triadic nature is broken down into three key forms of his approach to things. These are terms that he defines himself, Peirce defines himself, of the object, the representative, and the interpretant. And those three are, there's a determination flow between those three. Before I move on to the determination flow, I would just finish off on Saussure, that his is the signifier and the signified dyadic. Triadic, pragmatic, dyadic, structuralist. Okay. As I said in previous videos, and I will say in future videos, Peirce's language is very problematic for anyone who is not Peirce, because he defined and created these words, representative and interpretant, and it pertains to his theory. The point behind these videos is for you to come away from them with more designer-centric terms that are a meta language that you understand, which will encompass his theory. So object, representative, and interpretant, very problematic words. So let's look at these in a different way. This is the determination flow between the three. Object in Peirce's language, from a designer-centric point of view, it's the concept you start from, the intention, the message that comes from your client that you need to actually think through and find out what it is that you need to visually communicate. The second one, the representative, is the representation that you decide upon that is going to be the most effective way of gaining the audience's attention over the noise to actually be able to focus them into making decisions about your design, positive decisions, hopefully, that will change their behavior. I'll talk about Frascara in future talks as well. If the representation, the representation that you define within your visual communication makes connections to your target audience, they will interpret it in the correct way that we want them to. So the interpretant is using a term that's better for designers, is how the visual communication will be interpreted by the audience. If it's interpreted the right way, they will make the connections to the meaning and the intention of the brief. So it should become a triangular flow from the concept, the object, to its representation, the representative, to its interpretant, which is the interpretation, and from the interpretation, the correct interpretation should reflect the concept. So this is what we call the determination flow, and I will talk about determination flows in future videos and unpack that further to more specific focus for graphic designers. This diagram came from a workshop that I did with a professor of semiotics, Paul Cobley, who's another Scouser, back in 2018 at the Graphic Design Educators Network conference in Northumbria University, and I've done that workshop a couple of times with designers. So these are the languages, these are the words that come out from designers and what designers use that can be used as a meta language over the top of Peircean terminology to make it more accessible to graphic designers. And that's the intent of these videos as we go forward. But that's it for now.
So that is our 10 minutes of Peircean Semiosis 101, focused on Hall's semiotic journey to frame Peirce's sign action. This now gives us a clearer understanding of how Peirce's semiosis involves the audience directly in the sign action. By embedding a Peircean sign action model into our creative processes, we can enhance addressing our key audiences and improve how we connotatively visually communicate. This enhancement in our visual communication abilities rests in the communicational space between the concept we need to communicate, how it is represented so that it facilitates a successful interpretation in our target audiences. So we will now end this first omnibus with the fourth episode on general Peircean semiotic theory, the semiosis box of tricks, where we explore how semiosis's sign action actually works. Now, Peirce created the name semiosis and defined its meaning as sign action. In this following 10-minute-ish video, we will focus on explaining semiosis using a box metaphor coined by Roderick Munday. Now, through this metaphor, we explore how the client, the creative, and the audience we identified in the semiotic journey are all crucial to effective semiotic communication. Now, this new semiotic understanding will help you see your visual communication abilities in a completely new way. This will be the last 30-pack 10 minutes of semiosis in design-centric terms in this omnibus. So, stay tuned. You know what's coming. Subscribe, hit that bell, and let's get to the fourth video.
Okay, so in this video, we'll unpack semiosis, sign action, and how sign action works. Just to give an understanding of that first before we move on to anything else. Okay, so within Daniel Chandler's excellent book, Semiotics, the Basics, he talks within there about Peircean theory, and he uses a metaphor that I think, if I'm correctly remembering it, one of his students, Roderick Munday, developed to explain what semiosis is and how semiosis works. And he uses the metaphor of a box. So that's what we'll focus in on for the majority of this 10-minute talk. So here we are, we have a box. And there's going to be our metaphor for how Peirce's semiotic theory, sign action, works. So the sign itself represents something to us. So we see the box, it represents something to us. What it represents to us, by looking at the box, the sign, we get to see something that we think it means. So we interpret the something from the semiotic sign's representation. So how we see the box, how the box is represented to us, we can't help but put in our mind something that we think that this is representing. Our interpretation of that something connects directly to the intended message, if it's successful. So here we have sign action working. The sign that we want to communicate, the concept we want to be communicated, represents something to us as the audience. How it's represented, we interpret how it's represented. That puts in our mind a picture of what we think this is about, an idea, a concept of what this is about. Now that concept that we interpret from what we see, if effective, if semiotics is being used effectively and you understand who your audience are and what they will know and what they won't know, then it should connect back to the message that we need to communicate. Triadic, a three-step approach: concept, representation, interpretation. Concept, its representation, which is the box. This is what we see as the box before we open it. Once we open it, we see inside it, that is what I thought it was going to be. It's not a surprise, we get to see. So it doesn't really matter how ornate the box is in its representation, as long as it communicates what we need it to communicate, that's what happens. So the concept being the box, to its representation, through its representation, not to, through its representation, to its effective interpretation, should lead us back to the concept. So the intended message is concept. The semiotic representation of that leads us to the audience's interpretation of that, which then leads us back to the concept, the intended message's concept. The intended message's concept leads us to the semiotic representation, leads us to effectively, if it's done effectively, the audience's interpretation, which leads us hopefully back to the intended message we needed to get across. In Professor Tony Jappy's excellent book, Introduction to Peircean Visual Semiotics, which was a godsend to me when I was trying to understand this as part of my PhD. This book here talks in more accessible terms about Peirce's determination flow, and that's what we're talking about here, this triadic nature of a determination flow from the concept through how it's represented to its interpretation back to the concept. This interpretation is important to get back to the concept. So Tony Jappy talks about the determination flow in more accessible terms than Peirce does. And this is my designer-centric simplification of what all that means as sign action, as semiosis, as sign action. The concept to be visually communicated, how the concept is represented, and how the representation is interpreted, which leads us back to the message we got, the concept to be visually communicated. So this is a cycle that comes from the intention through the visual communication designer, the graphic designer, illustrator at stage 2, onto the audience at stage 3, and the audience then, through the effective visual communication, understands what they're looking at. It means this. This means this. That means that. Sean Hall's excellent book as well. So the sign action, just to summarise it all, the sign action within Peircean semiotic theory is comprised of this triad underpinning it. So it goes beyond the signifier and the signified, because it pulls in the important aspect to all of this, which is the audience. And that's one of the really key things that is really crucial when it comes to understanding how effective Peircean semiotic theory can be once understood and applied into your ideation phases in your illustration, graphic design work that you do. This is what encapsulates it. So it's this triad that forms the fundamentals of semiosis. The concept, how it's represented, how it's interpreted. And just to put back in the problematic words from Peirce: object, representment, and interpretant. So this sort of shows you the remit behind all of these videos on this channel, all the future videos that's going to be coming up, is to translate the problematic terminology that Peirce has in his philosophical theory on semiotics into designer-centric terms that illustrators and graphic designers and other designers can understand, appreciate, and see the relevance into their own design process where they come from. So it's not about dumbing down semiotic theory, it's about opening it up in its language into real-world contexts for designers and illustrators.
That was our last 10 minutes or so of Peircean Semiosis 101 Omnibus for now. Thanks to Monday's box metaphor, we have a clear understanding of how Peirce's sign action works in practice. Peirce's semiosis involves 3 things working together: the intended concept to be communicated, how we shape that concept's visual representation within illustration or graphic design, and how our target audience interprets the concept connotatively from our designed visual communications. By putting Peirce's complex theoretical language into designer-centric terms, we see how semiosis forms an underpinning structure to enhance how we can visually communicate with more precision through manipulating the sign action. We can move beyond Peirce's obtuse choice of words and move deeper into the benefits of understanding semiosis for visual communicators. Now, if you have enjoyed this omnibus, then please like these videos and subscribe to this channel below. And if you want to be notified when a new video is available, hit the bell button. As a fellow creative and a published design author, I have a link in the description to my Scout Scott website where you can also see the latest weekly Semiosis 101 video. You can read the Scout Scott blog or even browse the illustrated and typographical GIF ranges on my Redbubble shop. On the website you can find and also buy my 2014 design book published by Bloomsbury Publishing, Interface Design and Introduction to Visual Communication in UI Design. You see, over the years I have collaborated with other design academic researchers and Pearson semiotics to develop a designer-centric explanation of Peirce's theoretical language. So if you're interested in reading my semiotic Rosetta Stone academic writing, then you can also visit my academia.edu link that's in the description. Any other books on Pearson semiotics or design I've mentioned in the videos are also listed in the description. Check them out too. You see, by subscribing to this Scout Scott Semiosis 101 YouTube channel, you will learn how semiosis, Peirce's pragmatic semiotic theory, can help to enhance how you visually communicate. Now, I do have many more Peircean semiotic topics to discuss on Semiosis 101, but I'd be interested in hearing about your semiotic thoughts too. Add a comment below. And of course, if you like this video, check out my other weekly semiotic videos too, and consider liking and sharing those videos with others. Thanks for watching this omnibus. There will be another omnibus edition next month and a new weekly 10-minute Semiosis 101 video next week. But check out all the other Scout Scott Semiosis 101 videos, like and share them with your friends. You can also follow Scout Scott on Instagram and Twitter using the @Scout_Scott name. And don't forget to hit the bell button to be notified when next week's free Semiosis 101 video is published. So see you all again next week for another 10-minute Semiosis 101 video to help illustrators and designers to enhance your visual communication skills.